Tick, tock. That's the sound that's ringing through Germany's military high command as the country believes that a fight is coming soon. The fight will be huge. It will encompass all of NATO, and it will see the allies in Europe battle against the terrible enemy who has been trying to lay waste to Ukraine for almost 4 years, Russia. The clock is ticking and it's time to prepare for a battle that has gone from possible to imminent. In a shocking warning, one of Germany's leading generals has claimed that Russia could be preparing to launch a direct attack on a NATO member within the next 2 to 3 years. That general is Gerald Funke, who painted a picture of what this scenario might look like during a January 26th discussion with The Times. It's a scenario that makes for bleak reading. From the moment that Russia launches its assault against NATO, Germany finds itself in the thick of the action. However, it is the Germany of today, not the Germany that has spent the last few years preparing for this very scenario. Still, the country mobilizes. The 4,800-strong mechanized infantry brigade that Germany has stationed in Lithuania strikes back against the enemy, working alongside their NATO allies in the Baltic states. Their job is simply to hold on, to slow down the Russian advance until a rapid response team of 15,000 soldiers arrives at the front. That arrival would take a matter of days, but it would take several more weeks for tens of thousands of Allied soldiers all traveling through Germany to reach the front. Those soldiers will arrive via Germany's North Sea ports, and they will be then shuttled toward the Baltic states along roads and railways that have already been affected by Russian sabotage and hybrid warfare. With Russia actively on the attack, missile and drone strikes will also be a concern, meaning that some of the soldiers being transported might never make it to the front. Then, the horrifying part begins. Hundreds of casualties start being ferried back from the front, all into a German hospital system that is in no way prepared to handle the scale of death and injury that it's seeing. Germany would be plunged back into the darkest days of the COVID-19 pandemic. But that's the price to be paid for serving as NATO's logistical hub in Europe. Allies would arrive to offer support, of course, but as it stands now, Funke seems to be warning, NATO still has a long way to go before it's ready for the type of warfare that Putin wages. Funke has a plan, and Germany is trying to prepare itself for what it increasingly sees as an inevitable battle. But we'll get to that later in the video. This idea of a NATO war with Russia being closer than we might think has been discussed before. Funke's estimate of 2 to 3 years appears to be an echoing of the words of the German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius. Back in November, Pistorius outlined what he believes is the timescale of the impending Russian assault, and he made it clear that time is running out to get ready. We always said this could happen in 2029. But now there are analysts who believe that an attack is possible as early as 2028, and some military historians are even declaring last summer the last peaceful one, Pistorius claimed. New Sky reports that the German defense minister's claims were backed by intelligence assessments, specifically related to how Russia is attempting to rebuild its arsenal even as it wages war against Ukraine. Oxford Analytica has also spoken about this rebuilding, framing it in the context of a ceasefire or peace agreement with Ukraine. The outlet claims that Russia might see an increase in its arms exports as past clients start buying drones, along with the missiles and electronic warfare systems that have proven themselves effective in Ukraine. Money would flow in and Russia's defense manufacturing sector would go into overdrive, especially if the end of the Ukraine war, temporary or otherwise, is accompanied by a lifting of sanctions. Russia would simply be getting ready, and then it would strike again. Funke says there are already signs that Russia is getting ready for a much bigger fight than the one that it's taken on in Ukraine. What worries me at the moment is the hybrid side, the covert side. Sabotage, sleeper cells, some kind of targeted attacks. I can't rule out the use of long-range missiles, but I think the hybrid threat is very high, Funke tells The Times. Indeed, Russia's hybrid threat against Europe has been ramping up since Putin launched his invasion of Ukraine. New Eastern Europe says that this hybrid war actually started long before. As far back as 2014, which is the year that Russia launched a campaign of aggression against Ukraine that led to the annexation of Crimea, the Kremlin has been employing a multi-layered hybrid strategy against the West. Subversion and sabotage have become Russia's tools of the trade. Cyber attacks have targeted some of Europe's largest companies and governments. And, according to New Eastern Europe, Russia has spent well over a decade employing a campaign of disinformation designed to weaken the democratic institutions that stand in the way of Putin getting what he wants. Documented attacks increased fourfold between 2022 and 23, and threefold in 2024 compared to 23, the outlet reports. And it's not like 2025 has seen Russia de-escalate its hybrid warfare amidst peace talks with Ukraine. If anything, it's been getting worse. Russia is actively engaged in a shadow war with the West, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, said back in March. The main directorate of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation has been actively recruiting what CSIS dubs local assets to carry out sabotage and subversion missions that Russian agents can't or won't carry out themselves. Of these attacks, which occurred during the period that New Eastern Europe documented, 27% have targeted transportation infrastructure. The same percentage have targeted government facilities, including military bases and even individual officials. As for the other 42%, those attacks are divided evenly between infrastructure targets and European industry. The scale of these hybrid assaults has already led Europe down a path that it once thought unthinkable: actual, tangible retaliation. By November, Politico was reporting that several European countries were looking at some form of retaliation. Troops marching toward Moscow were never an option. The surprise military drills and delivering a little hybrid warfare of their own through cyber operations were up for discussion in several of NATO's European member states. Cynics will argue that this was Europe being Europe, a lot of talk but very little in the way of action. However, though the gears of the European NATO machine may move slowly, they have at least started moving. The question now is, are they moving fast enough to ensure that NATO, Europe, and Germany are ready for what Funke says is coming? But before we answer that question, this is a quick reminder that you're watching The Military Show. Subscribe now for daily videos covering the latest military news in the US and Europe. But back to the question at hand, what NATO now needs is a plan. And as we said earlier in the video, Funke happens to have one, though he has also highlighted a handful of reservations and barriers that we're going to cover along the way. Funke knows that Germany's primary role in a war between NATO and Russia will be to serve as a logistical hub for all of the allies that need to shuttle soldiers and equipment through Central Europe and onto the Eastern Front. It's important for us to maintain Germany as a logistics hub and manage the supply lines for as long as possible, as smoothly as possible, meaning that if one route fails, we will have the option of using others instead, Funke tells The Times. This is vital when the front line of what you might call the new Cold War no longer runs down the center of Germany. It's almost 1,000 miles to Germany's east and could potentially run across Finland, the Baltic states, and thanks to the position of the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad, Poland. Setting up appropriate logistics is easier said than done. As Le Monde reported in November, the question of European military mobility has long been overlooked, and that is a serious problem. Investments have been delayed and hurdles have been put in place when it comes to NATO's European members developing themselves into a collective fighting force that could run through Germany. And let's face it, Europe has also been dependent on the US to back up its military might. Moving tanks in particular could be a problem, as Le Monde points out when discussing a 2022 attempt to transport Leclerc tanks to Romania via road. These tanks had a reason to be heading into Romania. They were coming from France to strengthen a French deployment on its NATO allies' territory. However, strict limitations on the weight of vehicles in Germany prevented the tanks from heading to their destination via the roads, which forced the delay, as the tanks then had to be loaded onto trains before being sent on their way. It's slowdowns like this that Germany can't afford to allow if NATO is at war with Russia, and Funke knows it. So does the European Union, or EU, which Le Monde says set itself a goal of requiring just 5 days to move a military convoy across the continent. It's nowhere near reaching that goal. According to General Fabrice Viola of the French Centre for Operations Support and Logistics, the average time required is closer to tens of days. It goes without saying that Russia could do a lot of damage in those extra days above the target that are currently needed to ship armor and other equipment to the front lines. These types of issues simply can't exist if NATO is to follow the strategic routes that form the backbone of its collective plans to tackle Russia. Though you might like to think that Germany would lift such bureaucratic red tape as weight restrictions on its roads in the event of war with Russia, these sorts of issues plague Europe. For Funke, planning for a war with Russia has to start with dealing with these logistical issues. He brings up what it would take for UK troops to reach the front lines of that war via Germany as an example. If British troops had to move through Germany, they'd come via a port like Emden or Bremerhaven, and from there they'd be guided to the eastern flank, wherever that ends up being, Funke told the outlet, adding, "On the way, they need refueling. The soldiers need to rest, to eat, and potentially to receive medical treatment." These mentions of medical treatment and civilian preparedness are going to be important. You'll learn why soon. The good news amid all of this potential doom and gloom is that work is underway to improve NATO logistics, both within Germany and NATO itself. Back in June 2024, Militani reported that NATO was actively developing new corridors through which it could move troops in the event of a war with Russia. Back then, the main corridor would have seen the US troops arriving in Germany by way of Rotterdam, before being transported via rail through Germany and the Netherlands to Poland. Once there, the soldiers and equipment could be distributed along the Eastern Front. The outlet also reported that negotiations were underway to open up other ports to ensure that communication landlines can't be severed by Russia. These ports would potentially be in Italy, Turkey, and Greece, the outlet reported. From the age of this report, we can tell that the logistical question has been on NATO's collective mind for a long time, though some may be concerned that Funke is still highlighting it over 18 months later. By 2025, more plans were put into motion. a deep modernization of European transportation infrastructure was underway that would include the development of a pipeline for fuel sent to troops that runs through Germany and into Poland and the Czech Republic. That pipeline already exists. It was developed during the Cold War, and it ends in the Lower Saxony and Ingolstadt region of Bavaria, though it needs development to serve as a true through line for fuel in a wartime situation. But again, there is a problem. That project will cost at least 21 billion euros, or about $25 billion, and its estimated completion date is in 2035, long after Funke and Pistorius' proposed start of the war between Russia and NATO. Beyond this pipeline, Germany is also reportedly preparing a classified national defense strategy that it will enact in the event of a war. Obviously, we don't know the particulars of this strategy. However, United 24 media reports that it outlines multiple scenarios ranging from the kinds of hybrid warfare tactics we're seeing Russia utilize right now to potential precursors for a full-scale war. The current phase of the plan reportedly focuses on identifying threats, aligning interagency coordination, and strengthening logistical readiness. We don't know much more than that. Still, these are all indicators that Germany, and NATO by extension, are at least trying to prepare for a war that could come in as little as 2 years. Other preparations relate to two things we mentioned earlier in the video: medical planning and the reactivation of Germany's civilian preparedness. On the medical side, the Times points out that this is even harder than the logistical side of the impending war effort. For a start, NATO still needs to develop a plan to work out how many of the wounded will be sent to which of its member states once the war begins. Ideally, these medical states will be behind the front lines, meaning that whatever plan is created would have to be flexible to adapt to changes across the front lines. Germany would take on a large share of the medical burden, the Times says, which only adds another layer to its efforts to prepare for what some of its most prominent ministers and generals think is coming. Again, other NATO allies are doing their best to get ready. Back in June, Politico reported that many of NATO's frontier countries are preparing their hospitals for a wartime scenario. These are the Eastern Front countries where much of the initial, and NATO would hope only, fighting takes place. In Lithuania, for instance, the 2-day Iron Wolf exercise was created specifically to give medical staff an idea of what to expect from a wartime scenario. All of NATO's frontier countries are conducting exercises related to crisis response, Politico says, and they're also investing in ballistic helmets and vests, in addition to creating operating theaters that are underground and hopefully shielded from Russian bombs. Other countries aren't so prepared. According to a January 12th report in the I paper, the UK's Ministry of Defence has a £28 billion, or around $38.6 billion funding gap in its budget that will inevitably affect its capabilities during a war with Russia. The National Health Service isn't ready at all, says the UK's Chief of the Defence Staff, Sir Richard Knighton. If we ended up in an all-out conflict under NATO Article 5 and sustained mass casualties, the defence medical system is not set up to do that. It would have to plug into the National Health Service. But right now, we don't have a complete plan for how we would mobilise the National Health Service in the event of armed conflict at a NATO Article 5 level, Knighton said during an appearance at the Commons Defence Committee. It's clear that a lot more work is needed, at least in some NATO countries. And that fact is what makes Germany's 2 to 3 year prediction so terrifying. Returning to Germany, its armed forces have 5 hospitals and 1,800 beds, but they would likely be overwhelmed quickly in a war like the one Russia is waging in Ukraine. This is where the civilian aspect of Germany's preparedness needs to come into play, Funke says. He says that Germany needs to make some shifts back to Cold War days of West Germany to create a society that is ready to contribute wholly to a war effort. Funke speaks of standby agreements between Germany's national rail operator and the German government, which compelled the rail service to deliver trains on flat wagons for military service within 3 days of them being requested. It has to be said quite clearly that without civilian support within a total defense concept, we wouldn't be capable of defending ourselves, Funke tells the Times. And that concept of total defense may also be aided by Germany's plans to reintroduce something akin to mandatory military service among its young adults. Starting this January, all 18-year-olds in Germany will be sent a questionnaire asking them if they are interested in joining the country's armed forces. All of Germany's 18-year-old men will receive this form, though its receipt is voluntary for the country's women. From July 2027, Germany will also require all of its 18-year-old men to undergo medical exams to determine if they're fit enough for service, the BBC reports. France is doing something similar. It's introducing a 10-month voluntary military service scheme targeting people aged 18 and 19. If this is all starting to sound like NATO's European members are still underprepared for a war with Russia, especially one that could come as early as 2028, you may be right. But moves are being made. And according to News Sky, Germany also has a secret plan that it hopes will deter Putin from ever launching a war against NATO. That plan has been developed by German officers and involves sending 800 NATO troops to the Eastern Front. That's not the important part, though those troops could be a deterrent. What is important is that the plan encompasses the type of blurring between military and civilian lines that Funke says is important. The authors of the plan are blurring the line between civilian and military. The infrastructure, the army, and the legislation are being adapted to the logic of Cold War 2.0, News Sky reports. But again, these are just plans. Words on pieces of paper that may not be put into practice in time for a 2028 or 29 war with Russia. As for Russia, it's always difficult to figure out what Putin is planning. However, he's taking advantage of NATO bureaucracy with claims that there is a much easier way to prevent a war with Russia. During a 4.5-hour televised address in December, Putin was asked by the BBC if there would be any more special military operations should the one in Ukraine succeed. Putin responded, "There won't be any operations if you treat us with respect, if you respect our interests just as we've always respected yours." How magnanimous of Russia's leader. Of course, Russia's interests appear to be the destruction of Ukraine and the retaking of other former Soviet territories, which are interests that NATO simply can't respect. And Putin knows it. He's playing to that fact. The question now is, are the German officers and generals correct about Russia's time frame for a war with NATO? If they are, then plans need to be put into practice. Because right now, Funke seems to believe that Germany, at the very least, isn't ready for what's coming. Of course, all of this assumes that Russia will even be in a position to attack NATO nations. That's a situation that is still very much up in the air, as Ukraine is making it harder for Putin to do anything like amass the type of force that he would need. Ukraine's drones are tearing through the Russian military so quickly that there may be nothing left for a war with NATO. Find out what we mean in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more videos covering what NATO is doing to prepare for war with Russia. And thank you for watching.